Hello world, this is Stefan of Lendrigan Games. My years in boarding school were the loneliest years of my life. Strangely, being surrounded by humans and sleeping next to humans left me completely alone. I was an outsider in a small community. And it was a strange irony. Of course, and the flip side was after I graduated college and lived in an apartment all by myself. Those were the better years of my life. I'd go out to karaoke once a week and make friends with many of whom I still talk. And so being left alone was the most social that I've been. Why am I bringing this up? Because I'm in the exact same situation with Christmas right now. If I can avoid Christmas, I don't mind it. I can enjoy it. But right now, I've been roped into preparing for Christmas. And because of my life, if ever at first I succeed, something went horribly wrong. So I'm not running errands, I'm running errands all over again. It has been eating up my free days, and I hate Christmas, and it just brings into clearer focus that everybody's making such this giant fuss over a deity's contribution to tax season. Hooray, you were born, go you, how do you feel? And honestly, he probably wasn't felt that impressed by it either. Yeah, I've read that the early church used to celebrate only Easter because that's when he did something. So, unfortunately, I don't have anything to show you this time around either. Gonna keep trying. So let's just move on to the ramble. Number 41, Hinterlands Orc Lords. Hinterlands Orc Lords is a mix between hack and slash adventure and town building. The premise of the Hinterlands is that the player's character is starting a colony for the king, so he needs to both build the colony, populating it by convincing visitors to stay, and clear out the surrounding wilderness. The first thing about Hinterlands that grabs me is that the player character is the aggressor. The dark elves, dragons, and skeletons that populate the land have done nothing to the king, and the player character is there specifically to take their land by force. I don't know if Tilted Mill meant the scenario to be taken that way, but even if they didn't, the end result is much more intriguing than is the typical selfless protagonist. The next part is the blend with the town building. Hinterland succeeded in convincing me to spend as much time in the town as in the wilderness. And while it isn't particularly complex or deep, it is more importantly understandable, smooth, and rewarding. Number 42, EYE Divine Cybermancy. EYE Divine Cybermancy is a cyberpunk first-person shooter with upgrading elements and pseudo role-playing elements. I refer to the role-playing as pseudo, but the writing in the game is so bizarre and confusing that I'm not entirely certain that what's happening on the screen is even what's happening in the game. Other than that, the first part of the game that sticks with me is the loadout system. Unlike most shooting games, wherein the character's carrying capacity is a predetermined number, the equipment capacity in EYE is determined by a backpack system, meaning that what and how much your character carries depends on whether or not there's room for it and how much you're willing to weigh your character down. On that note, EYE shares with Morrowind the weaving of a multitude of upgradable variables that affect each other. Again, running and jumping depends on leg speed and how much your character is weighed down by his loadout. As for the equipment itself, there is quite enough to suit plenty of playstyles, even within each item category. Pistols have the Desert Eagle, twin 9mm, and 44 Magnum. Submachine guns have the MP5 and a Mega Uzi, whose two fire rates are fully automatic and Vulcan. Again, with playstyles, most of the guns in EYE have multiple fire modes. My own loadout is the minigun for standard operations and the MP5 for whenever I want to pretend to be tactical. Extending even further in player choice is the option to not even use guns. Getting good at hacking allows one to get into ATMs, sentry robots, electronic locked doors, and even the heads of enemies. Then, of course, there's psychic powers. Options there include throwing cars, cloning oneself, making people explode, and even teleporting inside of them and making them explode that way. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about cybernetic abilities such as cloaking and infrared vision. I haven't used them much, but I do get a tinge of glee when I see someone and then blow them away through a wall. To sum this all up, EYE Divine Cybermancy is unabashedly insane, and I love it for going all in on that. Number 43, Mountain Blade Warband. Mountain Blade Warband is a pseudo-medieval simulation with upgrading elements, party and army building, and pure role-playing. The central premise of the Mountain Blade series revolves around starting as a plebeian, rising to nobility, founding and leading a faction, and ending with ascension as God Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Of course, that is the avenue merely for beating the game, something that's quite hard to focus on doing. I have yet to either beat the game or even care to do so. With the simulative aspect of Warband, your character starts with eking out a means to not get wantonly mugged by roving bandits, thus begins the role-playing. Mountain Blade as a series encapsulates the double-edged sword of engine-based role-playing, as opposed to script-based role-playing as championed by Fallout and Way of the Samurai. One of the common complaints against the series is that the gameplay is completely unfocused. Ironically, the fans of the game consider that same laissez-faire attitude to be its best quality. The beauty of Mountain Blades being a simulation is that it hands the narrative completely to the player to craft, letting him fill in the details of the three acts with the actions of his character. Unlike the Elder Scrolls, Mountain Blade completely is action role-playing. Hiring recruits, training them, buying mercenaries, buying beer halls, gathering companions. These are all part of Act 2 in the character's latest arc. Granted, engine-based role-playing doesn't lend itself to a novel-length adventure, but it does very effectively create a series of short stories. See also Elric of Melnibone. In fact, every time that the player tries to attain something, a new story is started. Number 44, Sengoku Basara. Sengoku Basara is an over-the-top hack-and-slash game in the style of Dynasty Warriors that takes place in the cartoonishly fictionalized version of the Sengoku period of Japan. It's also another perfect game. I haven't played enough of Dynasty Warriors to be able to say exactly how differently from each other do the characters play. In Sengoku Basara, however, the differences between characters start with their basic attacks. Each character has their own rhythm and style, and the genius of what Capcom accomplished is that playing characters how they're meant to be played isn't merely a barrier to entry, but it instead is fun and visually interesting. It's not just the combat either that looks gorgeous. Following its over-the-top nature, the game's color palette is vivid and a feast for the eyes. In fact, there's so much color in the game that after my PlayStation 3 broke, I realized that the game had turned me gay. That's just how devoted the game is to delivering a gay time. Colors are over the top, the characters' appearances and performances are over the top, the action is over the top, and is all with a top-notch polish, served for the express purpose of entertaining. So, out of 10, I score it the prestigious Liberace. Number 45, Fable 2 and 3. Fable 2 and 3 are hack and slash games with upgrading and light role-playing mechanics. The writing is blandly cliche and the worlds are boringly shallow, but the combat is buttery smooth and fluid. While saying that combat is the only reason to return to a supposed role-playing game sounds like the game has disturbingly little merit, That combat is a reason to return speaks highly of what the game has. Mainly, I love the concept of switching between sword, pistol, and lightning bolt at the press of their own buttons during a fight. Of course, I've never done all three attacks inside of one fight, but not taking an option won't stop me from appreciating it. On a side note, having attack styles bound to attack buttons is the combat that Jade Empire should have had, instead of the most boring game of Tekken that it is. Moving on, the other feature that still sticks with me is the body morphing. It's hard for me to put into my words my enjoyment of this because the effect is subtle, resulting in my being not dazzled at any one point, but thinking fondly of it when seeing it as a whole. Then again, that is the nature of organic growth, changing incrementally across a span of time. Fable 3's focus of morphing the weapon instead of the character had horrible and horribly miscommunicated execution, but the concept also has some intrigue to it. Number 46, Dragon's Dogma. Dragon's Dogma is a fantasy hack and slash game with upgrading and vaguely role-playing elements. Like Dark Souls, it has a Western European aesthetic with an inescapably Japanese tinge, and I find it all to be artistically interesting. Its first feature that caught my eye is in the character creation. Specifically, the size and weight of your character affects some strengths and weaknesses. When I was trying to make a tabletop game to compete against Dungeons and Dragons, I realized that options matter most when the player has both a reason to take an option and a reason not to take it. And Dragon's Dogma's character creation embodies that. A large character is strong, but easily tired, and a small character is energetic, but easy to push around. Having both a give and a take with each choice makes the choices meaningful. For that reason, it's somewhat ironic that I applaud the class selection for having neither give nor take. Joseph Anderson, in his Dragon's Dogma video, explained that combat is fundamentally a numbers game in the vein of MMOs, meaning that tactics can sway the battle only so much because you either have the raw numbers to beat an enemy or you don't. Myself, I consider that an acceptable sacrifice for balance between classes. One may argue that the differences between classes are purely visual and preferential, and I take that as a proclamation that the classes feel different from each other. Men-at-arms, wizards, and archers feel differently from each other and have different styles of standard operations. Because there's no singularly optimal play style, I don't mind the hidden tactical depth. The rest of my adoration is a small detail. Like in Morrowind, how fast your character runs is affected by how much he's carrying. Unlike Morrowind, however, encumbrance is determined into categories of weight, meaning that as long as you're carrying less than a certain amount, picking up a little more won't affect him. Ultimately, I prefer that because in Morrowind, I always had the knowledge in the back of my head that picking up a feather would slow me down just that little bit more. Number 47, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is a fantasy hack and slash game with upgrading and minor role-playing elements. With Kingdoms of Amalur, what really sticks out to me is its unabashedly artistic visual style. The mechanics aren't in and of themselves anything about which to write home, but the shameless stylizing makes it all look gorgeous. Number 48, Saints Row 2! Saints Row 2 is a sandbox action game that revolves around doing missions in order to take over a city. Of all of the things that Saints Row 2 did correctly, the best feature for me is the rewards for completing challenges. Because you need to complete only so many in order to go through the whole story, I used those character upgrading rewards as opportunities to differentiate characters from each other. Of course, that's a personal reason for appreciating that, but even without that reason, I still prefer that avenue of character upgrading over the leveling system that 3 and 4 implemented. On that note, I still enjoy the writing in Saints Row 2, and for the same reason as does everybody else who prefers 2 over the rest of the sequels. As much as I refuse to care about writing in games that aren't role-playing, and many of them that are, Saints Row 2's writing is an exceptional case study for how to put humor in games for maximum effect. Number 49, Magic Maker. Magic Maker is a 2D action platforming game that revolves around combining spell effects to make custom spells. Firstly, I applaud the game for being absolutely ridiculous. A few of the effects, besides the standard fire, ice, and lightning, are teleportation, causing targets to explode, ricocheting from target to target, making your wizard move more quickly, create traps, and even create automated sentry guns. For an example of mixing spell effects to create spells, let's take the ever popular Chain Lightning spell. To create it in Magic Maker, you combine the shock effect, the laser effect, so that you create a stream instead of a bolt, and the ricochet effect, after which you change the visual effect to shock, and voila, you have a lightning stream that bounces from target to target. As well, each time you beat the game, you get to add an extra effect to your spells, throwing all challenge out the window, which is what Magic should accomplish. Alright, this video is getting a bit extra ranty, but oh well. Here's my take on challenge and why Magic Maker serves perfectly well without any of it. Challenge is an avenue of investment for the player, specifically a test of and a chance to further hone a skill. The great draw of legitimately challenging gameplay is a sense of accomplishment and often the ability to claim dominance over the program. That's why neither battles of attrition nor long life bars make for a legitimate challenge. They test not skill, but patience. And nobody plays action games in order to wait. Challenge was a natural fit for the days of the arcade cabinets, and challenge that felt legitimate struck the perfect balance because a loss takes the player's quarter, and if he feels that he could potentially have won, he puts another one in. Thus, in the early days, challenge was absolutely endemic to video games, leading to the popular belief that some challenge is necessary. When someone says that a game is too easy, it makes me wonder, how hard does it need to be, and why does it need to be more difficult? Mind you, this line of questioning is coming from someone who, when confronted with complaints of a game's being too difficult, responds with, "Get good, scrub." Ultimately, challenge is a facet of engagement between the game and the player. While I'll never demand removal of it, because I have the supernatural restraint to just not buy those games, if a game engages me without it, then the game doesn't need to have it. Number 50, Crackdown! Crackdown and Magica are absolute proof that the realism argument holds no water. Also, foosball. Crackdown is a sandbox action game where you play as the Incredible Hulk with a police badge and a machine gun. The first thing in Crackdown that tickles my fancy is the sense of total freedom. When you first boot up the game and your agent gets in a car, he comes across 3 exit ramps, 2 of which are locked off. However, nothing stops you from driving that car onto the highway and going to the 2 areas locked off only from the starting place. So the entire map actually is open from the beginning. Moving along the last axis, the agent is also able to jump onto buildings. Like in Sengoku Basara, the action is wildly over the top, though in Crackdown, it's an exaggeration that follows, and Rocket jumps beyond, action from 1980s action movies. When I referred to the agent as the Incredible Hulk at the beginning of this, that's because he has the same look when he jumps and approximately the same vertical leap. He doesn't start out that athletic, but he gets there quickly enough. In fact, I love the upgrade structure in Crackdown. Crackdown uses the training system, like how the Elder Scrolls does. So shooting criminals makes the agent better at shooting, blowing criminals up makes him better at explosives, and running them over makes him better at driving. As well, whenever he reaches the next level of a skill, he stops and goes through the quickening as he becomes filled with the next tier of power, after which he visually changes as well. The upgrade in skill is also quite drastic. He runs 10 miles an hour faster, or he lifts 500 more pounds, or whatever vehicle he enters gains 20 miles per hour more top speed, or the blasts from his grenades are 10 feet bigger. How does getting better at throwing grenades cause a regular pineapple grenade to launch a tank into the air? Because video game, that's how. On that note, thank you, video game.